focus less on all the skills you feel like you need to accumulate and focus more on like, what are those areas? What are those problem areas that you're going to be energized by day in and day out? And it won't matter if you know something or you don't know something, because you're willing to figure it out.
Hi, everyone. I'm Peter Barron.
And I'm Brendan Schneider.
And welcome to the Leadership Backstory. So, Brendan, here we are on screen with Ken Babcock, the CEO of Tango. We're super excited to talk to him about his journey. We were talking a little bit before we got going, and it sounds like we're going to start pretty early in the journey. So I love like digging into like the high school years, how that formed who you are. So, Ken, welcome to the Leadership Backstory. It's a real pleasure to have you here.
Thank you, guys. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. So, Ken, look, tell us a little bit about Tango, because I think I want to set up where you are now before we start on that journey. So, in just a little bit, could you explain what the service that Tango provides?
Yep. So Tango is a Chrome extension, allows you to create beautiful step-by-step how-to guides, complete with URLs, screenshots, automated descriptions, all in the flow of work, meaning you just go through your process. We sit in the background, we create that based on what you're doing. And then that's easily shareable to anyone on your team. So we're trying to lower that barrier to creating documentation to accelerate knowledge transfer within organizations.
That's something that's hot, big on my mind right now, all those standard operating procedures. So I'm excited to like get into that part of it and how your journey led you there. But you're from the Buffalo area, which, if anybody's wondering, has like the best sandwich in the world. The beef omelet is by far the best thing you'll ever have in your life. Talk to us about that. Like, what was that like growing up in Buffalo, and how did that set you on a journey that really has leadership at its core?
Yeah, totally. Well, I mean, growing up in Buffalo, it's really a story of resilience. You've got horrible snowstorms, terrible Bills teams up until, maybe 5 years ago. And, just heartbreak with the Buffalo Sabres. So, resilience, I think, is a common theme. But no, I grew up outside of Buffalo, small farming community. A lot of my friends growing up, they had dairy farms or soybean farms, or we actually, our house, we weren't farmers ourselves, but we had alternating soybean and corn sort of surrounding our house. So a lot of like small town values. And, it was kind of this like idyllic sort of Friday Night Lights-esque town. And, I played sports growing up. And I think, a lot of my leadership backstory, I always point to those teams that I was on, because I sort of fell into these captain roles really early and had to figure out, how do you lead your peers? How do you lead people that are, maybe older than you, or maybe you're the best player on the team and maybe you're not, but you're the captain. So sports paved the way for a lot of that. And, our teams, football, we were like very competitive. We'd always end up being like ranked in the state, but like our basketball team, I mean, talk about turmoil. We were like high expectations, like roller coaster every season. And, working through that, I think just pushed me in the direction of leadership.
Did you carry that through into college?
Yeah, I did. I mean, not the sports stuff so much, but leadership opportunities. I mean, I was, very active on campus. I was definitely one of the people that didn't maybe spend as much time on the classes, but spent a lot of time with like extracurricular activities. I think I also went to Cornell, which is in upstate New York, relatively close to where I grew up. But I went there, and, for me, it was like a very high stakes affair. And what I mean by that is I could have gone to like an in-state school, paid a lot less. And instead I was like, all right, I'm ready to take on, $50K in loans per year to go to Cornell, because I thought that would achieve sort of a better outcome for me. So I put a lot of pressure on myself to achieve, not just in the classroom, but like everywhere else, because I'm like, okay, well, that's going to get me a job, and that job's going to be relatively high paying, and I'll be able to come out of college and be able to handle that. So maybe different motivators, but I continued that leadership journey and continued to learn more about how do I, what is my leadership style, which I think is something that gets lost a lot when you talk about leadership. I don't think there's any one perfect style, right? And so all this journey has been a lot of like exploring what works for me.
Yeah, and I'm assuming that's like layered over the years, right? Like how you led in high school versus college versus today. I'm wondering like what that contrast looks like.
Stark.
That's
um,
yeah, that, that's good.
yeah. Let's see. I mean, you know, in high school and college, it was a lot of, how do you, how do you go from kind of being a peer to someone that people can look up to? So it was a lot of like role modeling certain behaviors, right? I mean, I think in sports, it's classic, right? You're the person that goes through conditioning the hardest, or you're the person that takes like stretches the most seriously, and so naturally you're the leader. So it's a lot of like role modeling that behavior. I found that relatively true in college as well. Like, how do you role model that behavior? But also, I think that's where it expanded to being, how do you complement that with an emotional intelligence that allows you to connect with people? So many people are going through so many different things, right? I think Cornell kind of exposed that a little bit more to me, and now leading Tango, leading a company, and a lot of people that are marching towards similar objectives and goals. It's a lot of, how do I enable an environment where we're able to have hard conversations, where we're able to be honest about what we think, that allows us to change direction on a dime if we need to,
Right.
or allows us to kind of double down on investment areas and admit what's not working. So very, very different, and like you said, it's all kind of layered on top of each other.
Yeah.
Were you seeking out those opportunities, Ken, or as a leader, or did they come to you based on how you were behaving and acting?
I think it was a little bit of both. I think it would be fairly naive to say that it was one or the other in my mind, because there was definitely that push of, I need to set myself up for success because I'm taking this big risk and big financial risk and going to Cornell. So I was seeking a lot of that. I was seeking sort of that achievement, accomplishment, resume building. But as I got more into it, I think it was more like, oh, this feels very natural for me. I think leading teams, rallying people around common goals, figuring out, what are the strengths, the weaknesses, and like, how to sort of the whole exceed the sum of the parts. Those were the types of problems that I liked thinking about. And so that it was sort of a combination of the two, if you will.
So Ken, you went through college, like it's really fascinating. Like I know when I was in high school and college, like I didn't really have this concept of leadership, but it sounds like it's really been ingrained with you at a young age. When you left and you took your first job, it looked like you went to Deloitte. Is that correct?
Yep.
Yeah. So what was that transition like? I mean, and what were you doing there, and how did that add yet another layer to your leadership philosophy?
Yeah, that was a challenging experience for me, candidly. I think it was probably the first experience that I had where I wasn't ready to be the poster boy for what I was doing. Everything before that, I felt like, oh, I'm doing this. I'm gonna go for the leadership opportunity. I'm gonna be like the head of the group or the organization, and that was one where I quickly realized this isn't really for me. I think I struggled with the fact that I didn't see anyone in my mind that I wanted to be long term.
Sure.
So the role model aspect, it's always been important to me. The mentorship aspect has always been important to me. And I didn't see or feel that at Deloitte. And I also felt like a lot of what we were doing from a work standpoint, and granted, I had limited data points. I was only there for a year. So I know everyone can have different experiences, but the work that we were doing felt very performative. It didn't feel like what we were doing was materially going to change the course of this Fortune 500 company. And I also realized that that's not necessarily a realistic expectation, but we were delivering a lot of like strategic recommendations and then going away. And let's see what they implement. In fact, we won't even check in to see if they implement it. We sold the work, we did the project, we checked the box. And so that was something for me where I had this cognitive dissonance of like, it's a team environment. We're working in a team. We're like traveling to the client site every single week. It has all the bones of like something that I would really enjoy, but the fact that the work wasn't tied to like an outcome and there wasn't real ownership, I started to question a lot of like, do I really want to be here? And so I only stayed there for about a year. I had interned there as well when I was in college, but the internship experience is like, it's like running through a high five tunnel. It's not what the actual job is like. So that 1 year was enough for me.
At what point did you realize that wasn't the right fit? I mean, was that something you observed quickly, or did it take a little bit of time to sort through that? Because I'm just thinking about it, like you're out of college, you're probably super psyched to be in the workforce, like it's a whole new part of your life, but yet you were able to discern pretty quickly that wasn't the right fit.
Yeah, it felt pretty quick. I mean, it was probably my first project, honestly.
Wow.
But yeah, I was right out of school. I was living in New York. All my best friends were living in New York. We were having a ton of fun, but something about that role just didn't really click for me. And I've always been someone who's been, extremely motivated, very much trying to put my best foot forward and do my best work. And I think it was just a situation where I didn't feel that, and that foreign or that absence of that feeling was almost like concerning to me. It's like, oh gosh, this isn't good. I need to figure things out. So, yeah, I mean, I call it self-awareness, call it just like shock. I mean, whatever you want to call it, that's what I felt pretty early on.
Before we move to where you ended up, you mentioned a word that I know is important to you because you've written a lot about it, mentorship or being a mentor. Is that something that's always been in? Like, were you looking for mentors in high school and college? Were you a mentor? Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, totally. So, I mean, I've done a lot of mentorship, whether it's through organizations like Year Up, which is an amazing organization. And then, in college, I was a teaching assistant for like 3 different courses. I was president of a business fraternity that was all focused on mentorship and like helping people secure internships, full-time jobs. So I did a lot of that, but I think it was largely because, it was more of this like pay it forward mindset. For me and where I grew up, and I loved my childhood and I loved where I grew up, but the odds were not necessarily in your favor. Like, it's pretty rare to have, people go to Cornell, to people go to like work in New York City. I mean, just things like that felt so foreign. And so, I just feel lucky that I had a lot of people that helped me along the way to get to that point, and emphasize like the right things at the right moments in time. So, I've always viewed it as like a way of giving back, and just knowing that like, if you find the right person at the right time, give them the right opportunity, it can materially change their trajectory. So it means a lot to me. I mean, it influences a lot of like what we're building in Tango too, because, there's nothing worse than feeling stuck in the workplace and feeling like I don't know something. I don't know who to go to. I don't feel confident going to that person, but, making more of that knowledge accessible is, a lot of the underlying motivator that, myself and my 2 co-founders, Brian and Dan, that we all felt.
Yeah. So you made the decision to leave Deloitte and then went over to Uber in a product role. Like what drew you to product? Because that's a different mindset than consulting, I imagine. And, seeing where you are now, clearly it was like a big part of your story, but like what drew you to product? What excited you there?
Yeah, so I should clarify. Product was eventually where I ended up at Uber, but when I first started out, I actually joined a team that was focused on our launch operations. So the idea was, hey, we're launching all these cities. I think by the time we joined or I joined, we were at like 150 cities. But the objective of this team was let's figure out, and it was a new team, let's figure out what we've learned from those 150 because we have big plans to keep launching, right? And so Uber would eventually get to like 700 markets. And so it was, how do we take those learnings from the first 150 and the learnings from each incremental launch that we would do and apply those to the next one? So, if you've ever heard people talk about like the Uber playbook, we were the Uber playbook team. We would literally hand it off to a city team and say, this is how you run your market. And these are validated, these are tested, these are quantifiable. So it was a pretty special group because we touched all of those on the ground markets in a way that, honestly was kind of like a best in class education around documentation. It was really,
I was just going to
like,
say,
yeah.
how much easier would it have been if you had Tango then?
yeah, exactly. It would have been a lot
Right.
easier.
Right.
And what I loved about it, and which is what also informed a lot of our thinking around Tango, is that it was constantly changing. Like what worked one month wouldn't work the next, or our interpretation of like, oh, this is how this city will perform would be completely turned upside down by some regulatory environment or, some rider behavior that we hadn't experienced. And so that documentation needed to continue to adapt, so we couldn't use, hey, this is what we learned when we launched Paris in 2012. We couldn't use that in 2015, right? We had to tell people, hey, that was a success story back then, but we've got a new view of the world. And I think that's so true for so many high growth organizations is your SOPs, your perspective on how you run your business that needs to change. I mean, if you're growing, it's changing. So that was another thing too that we realized when we were building Tango. The highest growth organizations not only need to create documentation, but they need to be able to rapidly change and improve that documentation too. So the barrier being high has sort of like multiplicative effects.
So you were at Uber for 4 years. Like what, and we keep talking about layering your leadership style. What were some of the key learnings there? What did you extract?
Yeah, there's a lot. There's a lot of I call it a lot of do's and don'ts. I'd say from my time at Uber. I think what was powerful about Uber, there was sort of this intangible leadership aspect. A very entrepreneurial culture. If you saw a problem that was big enough, or an opportunity that was big enough, you could go after it. Like as long as you made the right business case. You could rally a group of people. They didn't have to be your direct reports. They didn't even have to be on your team. But like, if you said, hey, fraud, this type of fraud is huge. We need to like figure out how to squash that. You sort of assemble a tiger team and go after it. And so that like informal leadership was really powerful. But then there was also, sort of the formal leadership role. So I became a people manager when I was 24 there. It was probably my second year at Uber. And that was really an awakening because all of a sudden I had inherited a team of 7 that was not mine before. Their manager had left the company. They had some baggage associated with that. They were also looking at me, who before was a peer to all of them. We all started around the same time. We were all at the same level. We were doing similar work, just in different areas. And, I had been sort of thrust into that leadership role, and now they were all reporting to me. And so there was a lot of, hesitation on those 7 direct reports. I mean, I had to move probably 2 people to other teams because they were like, this was my path, and now you're in that role. And that was really challenging.
Did you have a mentor there?
Yeah, I had a few. I think mentors can live within your organization, outside your organization. preferably outside, honestly, because then you can,
Yeah.
that's kind of a free spaced event. But no, I had a manager who continued to be my manager through that promotion, and our one on ones were largely me being like, I've got all these problems. How would you address these problems? And he was great about that. I mean, he was kind of the person that showed me, here's how you run one-on-ones, which sounds, it sounds intuitive. I mean, when most people think like, oh, one-on-one, like it's just two people like talking about work. Like how hard can that be? But like as a manager, there's a way you approach those, right? So he taught me a lot about that. He taught me a lot about like building trust and how you need to allocate your time as a manager. Like where do you invest in people? Where do you, try to sort of rescue lower performers? How do you help people kind of manage their career, outside of you, even if they want to go, like, say, outside of your team? There was just a ton of stuff where I was like, I need your help. And so I'm going to continue to bring these to you every single week. And, we did that for another 2 years. And so I mean, I still catch up with him, and I don't come with him with nearly as many problems because he doesn't have the context
Yeah.
anymore, but, he's still that outlet.
You said something about having a mentor outside of the organization that really, I completely agree. Brendan and I were talking to somebody not long ago about this concept of a personal board of directors, like people to call you on your BS, people to encourage you when you're down, like just people to like, just be
Yeah.
real with you. Is that,
Yep.
and I know I've got it right. And I don't know I don't know where it would be without it, frankly. Do you have something like that? Is that a concept that you've thought about?
Oh yeah. Yeah. I have, I mean, right now I have an executive coach, and she's amazing. And it's exactly that reason, because, and even if and me and my co-founders, we have an amazing relationship, I think largely because we started as friends in business school, and then we decided to build Tango together. But even with that, even if those bonds are strong, like you need somebody from the outside just to gut check you, right? I mean, there's so many blind spots and biases when you are the ones building the company. And you've also got this confirmation bias of like, all right, we've had some success doing this, so like this must be right, or this must be working. And just having an outside perspective to be like, no, that's not why you're successful. You're successful in spite of that. I think that's really powerful. So,
Yeah.
I value that. I value that relationship a ton.
Yeah. Do you encourage your employees to do similar sorts of things? Maybe not from an executive coaching standpoint, but just like, hey, like it's really important to have a network and to build that trusted group to keep you gut checked.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, I was working with our head of marketing and just being like, hey, here are a bunch of people in my Rolodex that I think are great in the marketing world. I'm gonna facilitate some intros for you. And it's not that, I value their opinion more than yours, or like I want you to soak up all of their knowledge. It's just more like, here are people that have experienced the things that you've probably experienced or you're going to experience. And that's just a group that can support you. And, even if it's just like once a month or once a quarter.
Yeah. I want to talk more about like the culture that you're creating at Tango, because you're clearly a thoughtful person and giving a lot of attention to like how do you build a sustainable place where people feel like they belong. And I want to get to that, but before, you had some additional stops along the way. One of which was like you're an executive in residence at an organization. Like, what was that? Like, I'm super curious about that. I saw that. I'm like, I got to ask about what happened then. Yeah.
Peter, I'm still trying to answer that question.
Okay.
But no, so I, when I left Uber, it was like 4 years and change, I'd fully vested. I was thinking about, next opportunities. And I saw a lot of my colleagues going off and like, okay, I'll just go to the next tech company, or, And that to me just didn't feel like the right next move. So I always said to myself, okay, you only leave Uber once. What's it going to be for? And this was the opportunity that I felt would get me closer to an entrepreneurial path. I think my view of entrepreneurship was, um, sort of naive in that I thought, okay, to be an entrepreneur, I need to accumulate all of these skills because I'm going to need to do all the things. So I need to accumulate all the skills. And so my journey was always, all right, how do I go do and learn some stuff in product now? How do I go become a data scientist and go do that? And this I viewed as a way for me to kind of be like a founder with trading wheels,
Man.
and, get my feet wet in areas that I hadn't really been exposed to yet. What I didn't realize is that I wasn't steering the bike. There might have been training wheels. I might have been on it, but I think it was a tandem bike and I was in the back seat, just like, with my feet on the handlebars or something. But no, it was, I think it helped me understand a lot of the dynamics, a lot of the, the challenges that come with entrepreneurship. I think the biggest thing for me was that, I was brought in and they already had kind of a preconceived notion of what they wanted to build at the incubator. They were just looking for the right founder.
And
the
you were a
more I
founder
went
in
down,
residence. That was your
yeah,
that was your official title. Yeah.
that was my title. And I think they've since like changed that title around for this type of role. But effectively they had hired me to work on an idea that they felt really strongly about. And the more that I explored it, the less strongly I felt about it. And I realized that there wasn't really the trust there for me to say, hey, I don't think this is a great idea. I think we should go pivot and do something else. They were pretty committed to the idea. And so the more that became clear, the more that I realized, okay, you know what? If I'm going to sign up for something for 5, 6, 7, 8 years, however long it takes to found and build a successful company, I have to like believe it in my bones that this
Right.
is what the world needs. I need to believe it so deeply because, every single day you're going to wake up and you're going to think about, okay, what do I need to do today? And it's going to be a lot of stuff. Not all of it's going to be fun. And there needs to be something in there where you say, this is why I do this. And so I feel like I have that with Tango, which is super powerful. I feel like, and that's probably the number one thing that we look for in hiring too. Like, this is going to be hard. There are going to be things that you do in a given day that you don't want to do, but what's going to be that underlying drumbeat that's going to get you through it? So I didn't feel that at Atomic, which was unfortunate because I had super high hopes. And it was right around that time where I got into Harvard Business School. I decided, okay, you know what? That's going to be an opportunity for me to take a step back, think about what it is that I really care about, and hopefully meet some co-founders.
When you said that, you felt like you needed to be a product person, a data scientist, like you needed to acquire all these skills and knowledges to be a successful founder. Do you still think that's the case?
No, I think curiosity is the number one determinant of whether you're going to be a successful founder. Curiosity and self-awareness. Curiosity in the sense that, like, if there is something that you haven't encountered, but you want to figure it out, you will go to your network, you will go to all the resources that are available to figure out a given problem. That's the curiosity that I think you need. And then the self-awareness piece is really just knowing what are the areas where you can be really impactful, really successful, and where are the areas where you can't. Where are the areas where you have blind spots? Because, I think that that's often a challenge for people that are put in this role because you're the backstop for so many things. Like, if you don't have a finance person, you're the backstop for finance. But if you can admit, hey, you know what, this is not my wheelhouse. I need to go figure this out in a way that sets the company up for success. I think that's what makes a successful founder. It's not, hey, I spent 6 months here, 6 months there, 6 months there, and I'm going to put that all together and it's all on me. That's the other thing. It's not all on you. So, like, thinking about how do you leverage your network, How do you build that into your hiring plan and acknowledge your blind spots?
Yeah. What? So you went to business school, graduated. How soon after that did Tango start to emerge as an idea?
We did not graduate. So
Oh, okay. There you go.
yeah, we actually, we left Harvard Business School after a year. So
Wow.
um, for us, I mean, there were a couple factors, and I think the pandemic actually played a huge role. We started
Yeah.
exploring Tango January of 2020. So in the middle of our first year, um, we were at HBS's startup boot camp. Um, we got some encouraging feedback, and we're like, you know what, let's like actually like keep going with this. Let's see where this goes. Um, and in the course of that, we were doing customer discovery calls and trying to just like learn more about, this problem of knowledge transfer. And then, when the world abruptly shifted, workplaces went remote, distributed, people started doing layoffs. Our customer discovery calls went from like, oh yeah, that'd be interesting. Like, we'd love to see what you guys build, to, if you can build this, we will use it. And so that level of urgency
Yeah.
was really powerful, because, here we are, we're on Zoom University, 90 people in a Zoom room at HBS. It's not what we're paying for. People are literally raising their hands to speak on a 90-person Zoom. I was like, we can't do this anymore. So, it was almost like, here's the thing that you came here to do. You've got amazing co-founders. Customers are asking for it. Go do it. Like, school can wait. Like, school will always be there. And so, that was the big motivator for us, is really this shift. And I don't think that, what we're solving at Tango is necessarily isolated to the pandemic. I mean, people talk about like, oh, pandemic stocks or like pandemic companies. It's just that, every company having to go remote and distributed exposed this problem in a major way, where it was like, oh, I'm remotely onboarding someone for the first time and we have nothing for them. Or we laid off 20% of our workforce and none of them documented what they did. So now we have to go figure it out from scratch. And so this is not stuff that's unique to a pandemic, right? It just exposed it. So that was a big motivator.
Well, and with a shift in the way we work, right? Whether it's hybrid, remote, in person, like they're just obviously people are working differently now. I think that has stuck, right? And so just, I think, punctuates the need for what you do. Talk to us about the culture that you're trying to build there. Like, you have a unique opportunity to build something from scratch. Like, what does that look like for you?
Yeah. So I'll reference some of my Uber days here too. Uber wasn't exactly the blueprint for culture. So, and I think that's well documented. So I learned a lot of like, what not to do there. And, so starting from that, what we tried to build was something where, people felt like they could speak their mind. People felt like we were winning together. It wasn't a bunch of like isolated victories or people competing. The camaraderie is so important. People felt like they were growing, so they were able to take on things that, were beyond maybe what they've done before. And, we got to know each other beyond just work. I think one thing that was challenging about Uber is it was hyper competitive. People were very scared to speak up, and you worked all the time. So there wasn't anything about your personal life. We were there from 8 a.m. to 10 p.m. and then you go home and maybe get some sleep, and you wake up and think about ride sharing again. And so what was important to me was creating a culture where people had the space to have a personal life. It's going to be hard. It's a startup, but we don't need all of your time. We know that there's other priorities. We know that like for you to be your best at work means that you have other vehicles for your happiness. And then, the piece around being able to speak up and being able to grow, that was really important to me too, because I was lucky in that some of those mentors gave that to me, right? So a lot of, a lot of what we've been trying to do at Tango also is to create an environment that can work remotely. So, as you can imagine, in a remote world, there's maybe less of a personal connection that people feel. Um, it's harder to speak up. I mean, purely just given the channels that you have, it tends to be harder. And, that camaraderie that's so important, that's also challenging. Like how you develop connections over Zoom. It's a lot harder than if you're doing it in person. You have that sort of like water cooler or that lunch you can spend with someone. So, I think we've been very deliberate about how we build it, because we know that, hey, you know what? This is 35 people. We're distributed. We're all remote. We get together 3 times a year for our offsites. And in order to build the organization we want to build, we have to overcome that challenge first. But Uber did give me a good blueprint of what not to do.
I was going to ask, Ken, you had said we, and you talk about co-founders. I'd love to hear more how that did you find them? Did they find you? And then how do you split leadership? Kind of that whole thing.
Yeah. So, I mean, quickly on that, we had actually been introduced through mutual friends prior to, starting at Harvard Business School. So there was basically people that were like, hey, you guys should get to know each other. You're both going to Harvard Business School. And that happened kind of in 3 different directions. And so, we got together through that. And I think that was just like an easy entry point. I think it was the first day of school. And we all gelled, just as people. But then, the more we got to know each other, the more we realized, oh, we're actually all here for similar reasons. Like we all want to do something entrepreneurial, whether it's start a company, join an early stage company. And I think just based on our experiences, we fell kind of into like natural complementary roles. Brian was an engineer. He's our CTO today. Dan had been in VC, had a lot of experience working with companies sort of Series B or later as they're adding on that sort of scaling revenue function. That's what he oversees today. And then, for me, I came in with this people management, high growth tech exposure. And, again, it sort of fell naturally into a leadership role as a CEO.
Yeah. Ken, you talked about letting people use their voice, which is a really powerful thing to do. And but I think that also requires an organization to be committed to being transparent, right? Like I just think, I don't know how you could use your voice and not be willing to build a culture of transparency. Like how does that all work for you? And how did you I mean, how did you arrive at really wanting to focus on letting people use their voice?
Yeah. So, I mean, the transparency piece, you do have to be very conscious about how you do that. And, that means giving people an insight into the conversations that you might be having, but they're not there. So, whenever we have a board meeting the next week, we set aside time for the team. We actually walk through the board deck with the team and what the discussion looked like every single quarter. And that's really when you you show everything.
You let it all out there.
Right. And so, I think when you look at that in isolation, that exercise that we do, that's just one example. I think there's a lot of other examples that I could talk about, but when you think about that one and we say, hey, here's our dirty laundry, here's maybe our clean laundry, here's what's going well, here's what's not going well, that gives people the license to admit when something's not working. That gives people the license to actually say, hey, why are we still doing that? Or why are we doing it in that way? If it's not actually like driving results, or it gives people the license to just raise their hand and be like, there's something I'm working on. It doesn't feel like it's aligned with our priorities, especially given like the board conversation. How do I shift my time towards something else? And so, that is an example of how we approach transparency. It's like, how do we just have honest conversations? How do we come into meetings and say, hey, Ken, CEO, co-founder here, I have a super half-baked idea, but here it is. What do people think? And just getting people comfortable with presenting things in that fashion, or even just saying, hey, look at that metric. Like, what's wrong with that metric?
Yep.
Why aren't we doing anything about it? Driving accountability. So, that transparency is important because it allows people, I think, to move quickly. I mean, the scarcest resource you have as a startup is time. We talk about that a lot. Time is some sort of function of how many people you have, how many hours in a day you have, how many insights you can gather. And so the quicker that we're able to say something's not working, or here's a huge opportunity that we need to go pursue, that's better for us, because we're always looking and saying there's a clock that we're racing against, whether we like it or not. And so facilitating that conversation so that people don't stew on it and they don't wait on it, that's really, really important.
If you go down the path if you see a big opportunity in front of you and decide to pursue it, how do you balance that against the priorities that people are working on already? Like, do you sunset things? You're like, look, we're just going to walk away from that. We can't do that right now. We're going to focus here. How does that work?
Yeah, I would say that one's a challenge. We still haven't cracked the code on that, because I think the DNA of a startup is, people are very cross-functional. You've got to do all the things. You've got to kind of make it all work, even if it's not your arena of expertise. But, we're getting better at saying, okay, here's an opportunity. If we're going to tackle this, it's going to come at a cost. So of the things that we're working on, what feels like the most significant deviation from our current priorities, or what's the thing that feels like a distraction? So yeah, there's always a cost. And especially now too, as organizations are thinking about, how do I do more with less? I like to think about that as not, how do I do all the same things that I was doing with less people? I like to think about it more as like, how do we reprioritize and go deeper and do more in the areas that we can really be successful?
Are you about 3 years into Tango now? 2020, I guess.
3 years. Yeah, 3 years.
3 years. How have you grown as a leader from then to now?
In the beginning, as a co-founder, you're like this high-powered individual contributor, right? You're doing everything that you need to do. You're doing the legal filings, you're doing the financial models, you're doing the hiring plan, you're doing strategy, you're doing some of the product management, you're doing the data analytics. So you're doing it all, right? And then I think one article that I reference, it's from First Round. They have their blog is awesome, just a wealth of knowledge there. But they have an article that talks about giving away your Legos and how to grow as a startup leader. And the idea is like, you're going to have these piles of Legos, these things that you do, and then eventually it's going to be time for you to give that to somebody else. That somebody else is going to bring a new perspective, a new level of expertise. They're going to build that pile bigger. But then it's on you to figure out, okay, well, what is that new pile that I'm going to take on? Or what's that new pile that I'm going to build? The article does a much better job than I just did of explaining it. But the whole idea is, the leadership change that you undergo is, I can take on a lot of things, to how do I enable others to achieve more than I could alone, right? And so finding those opportunities to delegate sometimes is a dirty word, but it shouldn't be, because it's really about, figuring out who can make something better than you can do. And, I think that's been a big change. How do I enable people? How do I, unblock people from the things that they're working on? And, just generally like help accelerate a lot of our momentum.
I'm curious, do you cross-check that against the things that you do well? Meaning, like, if you're delegating, maybe you're delegating responsibilities that you can do, but others can do better, so that I can focus on the stuff that I know is going to have real impact. Like that that I'm wondering about that for you. Is that
Yeah.
important? Yeah.
Oh, it's super important. So there's actually a good framework that I like that Matt Mockery, who's sort of this famous tech executive coach, he talks about it as kind of a 2x2 matrix.
Okay.
Here are the things that I'm uniquely good at. Here are the things that I'm not uniquely good at. And then here are the things that I enjoy. Here are the things I don't enjoy. So that's your 2x2.
Yep.
You want to be operating 80% of your time in the things that you enjoy and the things that you're uniquely good at. He calls that the zone of genius, which
Yeah, sure.
hysterical but memorable. So the zone of genius is good branding. But yeah, we go through that exercise as a founding group. I go through that exercise with my direct reports. How do we get people closer to that 80% benchmark of your time being spent in the zone of genius?
Yeah, smart. It's really smart. Hey, I want to be respectful of your time. I know you've got a busy day, and so thank you for coming on the show. But we like to end with this last question. And we've just gone through your career and just all the way back from when you were the captain of the football team, right? So like I feel like I've seen Ken's growth over a number of years here. But if you had a chance to walk a different path, if you had a chance to do it differently, would you take the same path that you've taken?
Oh man, this is a tough one. I think probably the advice I would give my younger self is really about that piece we talked about of feeling like entrepreneurship is about accumulating a bunch of skills. I think that delayed me a little bit in wanting to pursue something entrepreneurial, because I was always thinking about not quite ready. I think the path I followed was, I hesitate to say I would change it at all, but that would be the advice that I would give, is like focus less on all the skills you feel like you need to accumulate and focus more on like, what are those problem areas that you're going to be energized by day in and day out. And it won't matter if you know something or you don't know something, because you're willing to figure it out. So that's how I'd reshape it, but I don't think I would change anything. I feel very lucky to have been on the path that I've been on.
That's great.
Ken, that's great. Thank you for doing this. So the final question is, where can people connect with you or learn more about you?
Yeah, so I'm, feel free to shoot me a note. I'm ken@tango.us. Best way to learn about Tango is our website, tango.us. And, feel free to connect with me on Twitter, LinkedIn. Either of those work.
Thanks.
Well, Ken Babcock, CEO of Tango, thank you. Thanks again. I really do appreciate learning more about your story, and wish you all nothing but the best of luck. It just sounds like you're on an exciting journey.
Thanks, Peter. Yeah, it's been fun.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Leadership Backstory. Make sure to subscribe from your favorite podcast player and leave us a review if you like what you hear. We appreciate you sharing your feedback with other listeners. Peter Barron and Brendan Schneider host the Leadership Backstory. Catch you on the next episode.